Today I'd like to speak about Ramadan, Quran, and hijrah, or the opportunity for us to have a personal change during this month. This is from the perspective of the organization which I run, called Quranology Institute. And Quranology Institute has a particular way of reading Quran, what we call the existential reading. This reading is essentially trying to understand Quran as it is being revealed today, which in a way I think it is. The meaning is continuously being unfolded to us as we continue reading it, and that yields greater and greater levels of wisdom. I think it's a very beautiful process, and to experience it during the traditional month of Ramadan is particularly beautiful, I feel. But what do we do during this month of Ramadan? Well, on a very superficial level, we fast. We don't have breakfast, lunch, and possibly even dinner, but instead we have our breakfast, iftar, and our sehri, which is the pre-fast meal. So that in itself is a change. But also, if we want to take it to a deeper level, perhaps it can also include self-control. I mean, I know generally it doesn't. I mean, when I was growing up and I was fasting, it was generally about starving yourself until evening and then just letting yourself go. You probably would lose weight. I mean, I know I was quite heavy as a child, and I did lose weight during Ramadan, but I would put it all back on again after Eid. Because the change was not a conscious change. It was just incidental. You had to do it, it was performative, and the change just disappeared once that period was over. But I don't believe that is the Quranic approach to Ramadan. I mean, as far as when I read Quran, what I see is the concept of sawm, or siyam, or fasting, or abstinence, discipline, some people call it, is to curtail oneself. We are not to yield to our impulses. I mean, you know how it is. I mean, when I walk past Burger King and I smell the burgers and I'm like, oh, I'll start my diet again tomorrow or something. Something like that, you know? So that is something which during the month of Ramadan we are to control. And I think this is a very intrinsic part of Quranic thought. Because, you know, the Quran is about our personal evolution. We are to change, we are to grow. And to do that once a year, in my opinion, is not enough. Primarily because the change is quite drastic when Ramadan starts. And there is simply no kind of discipline once Ramadan is over. I mean, I remember on the first day after the Eid holidays ended, I mean, this was 20, 30 years ago when I was growing up, I would just start eating the way I used to before Ramadan, and I would forget about Ramadan quite soon. And I don't think this is what the Quran intended, at least not in my reading. To me, it's all about gradual and long-lasting change. If you look at Quran, when it first starts talking about Ramadan, this is chapter 2, verse 183, it doesn't even mention Ramadan. It mentions just Siyam. It says, written on you is the Siyam, or abstinence, or fasting, as it was written on those before you, so that you may preserve yourselves. And then it gives you certain conditions in performing this Siyam, or fasting. And then it mentions, in chapter 2, verse 185, then it mentions Ramadan. And when it mentions Ramadan, it's not just like fasting Ramadan, no. It says, شهر رمضان الذي أنزل في القرآن. Traditionally translated, the month of Ramadan is when the Quran is descended. هدى للناس, guidance for mankind, وبينة للهدى, clarification of the guidance, والفرقان, and criteria. So it's actually putting together the idea of siyam, fasting, and the descent of the Quran. So, traditionally speaking, it refers to the Prophet's first experience with the Quran, because apparently he received it in the month of Ramadan. But in my opinion, this can actually work for us today, because when we read Quran, as I said before, our understanding keeps growing and growing. Now we may think that that is just a rational process, but actually it's Allah descending to us that truth. And the more we discipline ourselves, in other words, the more we control our impulses, our egos, then I think the descent becomes more and more powerful. So Ramadan in Quran is not simply a 1 month a year kind of thing. It's an experience you actually achieve all year round. And when you achieve this particular experience, you will get a deeper understanding of Quran. As I said, Hudan lin-nas, guidance for mankind. So when you read Quran, you will see guidance for everyone. It's a general kind of guidance which is very universal. You can see clarification of the guidance. In other words, what God is guiding you, you'll be able to see it. And al-Furqan, you'll be able to see truth from falsehood very easily. Very organic process. And in the next verse, chapter 2, verse 186, it says, "When my servants ask concerning me, I am close." So you can see the context. First it talks about general fasting, and then certain conditions, and then Ramadan, and then the closeness of Allah with us. So this is what we need to bear in mind when we do Ramadan. I mean, I often hear people say, okay, well, this is really too much, summer Ramadans and it's too much for me and so on. They suffer through it and not actually understand that experience. To me, that is not making full use of the process. It's better for you to fast half a day and feel that consciousness than fast the whole day and let yourself go at the end and just sleep and wake up into the next day, etc. To me, that's just not what it's about. What it's about is that consciousness you take in that month, which you bring forward for the rest of the year. It's a long-lasting, personal change. The Quran gives great emphasis on this concept of emigration or hijrah. Now, I don't see hijrah as simply a physical migration. It can be, but it's not the totality of the concept. To me, hijrah is the idea of moving from place to place, whether it's a place in your life, whether it's a situation which you're experiencing, etc. So you are moving closer and closer to a goal. That is what hijrah is about. Traditionally, hijrah is said to be a change of the Meccan and Medinan period in the career of the Prophet. So the Prophet was preaching in Mecca for 10 years, and then he received some revelation, which told him to go to Medina. And he spent 13 years there before he passed away. So, to me, that was his experience of hijrah. What is my experience of hijrah? Well, I have certain habits which I am not totally satisfied with. I need to make hijrah or emigration from those habits. And I do believe that this migration is essential for the soul. And the soul is something which the Quran places great emphasis on. It's called nafs in Arabic. And twice Allah emphasizes, Allah says, you will not experience any kind of change until you change what is in your nafs. This is chapter 8, verse 53, and chapter 13, verse 11. So the nafs is something which is central. And fasting or discipline or abstinence brings you close to your nafs. Because in the grind of everyday life, we tend to forget about our souls. We're busy working, we snack whenever we want, we indulge ourselves whenever we want. So it's not really something which we give consciousness. It's not me. But when I make a conscious attempt to fast, and the impulse arises, so I feel, okay, well, I feel like having a snack now, but then I take control of myself and I say, no, sorry, I'm not going to eat until evening. So that brings me close to the reality of my soul. And this is what Allah says in chapter 91, verses 7 to 10. Allah says, by the soul and what gives it equilibrium, and He will guide you to that which protects it and disintegrates it. So He will show you the difference between the two. And قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا, whoever grows it, he is the one who will achieve success. How do you grow your soul? In my opinion, by the sawm of fasting. Because the more you stand against the impulses of your soul or your ego, the more you will find that you are stronger. And this is, in my opinion, the key to change. How does it work in the Quranic program? Well, when I say Quranic program here, probably worthwhile for me to clarify a little bit. I don't mean that the Quran wants us to establish an Islamic state in the conventional sense of the word. I don't believe that. But there is something called the state of Islam, which is a condition in which you will find peace in your life. Well, this can be anywhere. This can be in the street in London, where you live. It may not be a very peaceful place. But you yourself radiate the peace outwardly, and you bring that peace in your life. The Quran uses the word salam for peace. And it says, when you meet those who believe in our signs, this is not a religious thing, by the way, that anyone who believes in the signs of Allah, when you meet them, and this person could be from any kind of religious tradition, he could even be an atheist, as long as he believes that there is something good inherent in all people, you give him salam. You say salam, salamun alaykum. And this is not something that you just say as an Arabic greeting. It doesn't work like that. It's actually a sentiment which you project to people. So, in your daily grind, you may find that the salam is lost from you. Because obviously, you have some stress. People can annoy you and get on your nerves, etc. So you lose the salam. But if you had the sawm, the fasting, you will find that you are able to hold yourself back and just have some self-control. You see, so, this is something which is highly practical in your life. This is not a concept which descended 1400 years ago and has zero relevance. That would make it pointless. So, how do we transform ourselves in this, through this process? So we go back to the analysis of what Sawm is and where Sawm appears. As I mentioned before, it was in chapter 2, verses 183 to 187. And this particular chapter, chapter 2, Al-Baqara, this is the largest chapter in Quran, you will find the entire formula of establishing a utopian society. So once again, this is not an Islamic state in the Taliban sense of the word. This is any society you live in. You want to bring in peace. You want to bring in security. You want people to live harmoniously. This is the purpose of this. Actually, the entire Quran can be said to have this purpose. But the initial formulation is in chapter 2. And the fasting verses are also in chapter 2. Now, why is that? In my opinion, when I read the context, it's because fasting has that ability to control our most primordial instincts. And it's true, look, let's take a very simple example, the London riots. The London riots did not happen out of nowhere. All those emotions were boiling up to a point, and when that particular incident happened, the shackles were somehow removed, and everyone participated in those riots. Well, the rioters never had to participate in that. But the point is, if you had some measure of self-control, you'd be able to not experience that particular emotional peaking, and you would be able to handle the situation well. So that is the effect of Sawm or fasting. Sawm is not something which you do once, you forget about it, and you wait another year. No, the effects will be long-lasting if you do it properly. And once that component is in place, everyone who is actually participating in the social order, they will see that, okay, well, emotions is not something which we can allow to run wild. Emotions has its place, and it should go with reason. Fasting will allow us to do that. Coming back to hijrah, this word, hijrah, it appears about 31 times in the Quran. Hijrah is to emigrate. But again, it doesn't necessarily mean something which you do physically. It's something which you can do conceptually as well. In fact, if you look at chapter 74 and 73, these two chapters are quite famous in the Quran because apparently they were revealed to the Prophet when to get the Prophet to recite the Quran and to come to understand the Quran on his own. The chapters are called Al-Muzammil and Al-Mudaththir. And both these chapters have the word hijrah. Let me recite you the verses. Chapter 73, verse 10, it says, be patient on what they say. Who? The people who oppose the Prophet. The Prophet was trying to bring peace. And these people, they were saying bad things about him or to him. Allah says, be patient on what they say. And emigrate from them with a beautiful emigration. So in other words, you are being confronted, people are saying, you people are this and that, you are this and that. The Quran is telling you, move away with a beautiful moving. So you emigrate with a beautiful emigration. Sorry. And this is something which when you do, you will see the beautiful effects. People will not be able to rile you up. Because the minute they start opposing you or calling you names, etc., you just move away. You see? And the next chapter 74, also talks about that, and it says, from impurities, move away. So once again, this is not a one-off process. It is something which you do in order to achieve that long-lasting change. And so if you see, this is chapter 73 and chapter 74, which deals with the personal development of the Prophet. And then you will find that this hijrah concept appearing in earlier chapters. Chapter 2, it talks about hijrah in the path of Allah. So you are able to then move and establish that system of peace. It's the same with chapter 4 and chapter 3. They also talk about this particular hijrah. And with this hijrah in mind, that's how we should undertake Ramadan. I mean, I know the change is fairly drastic. You don't really get any kind of practice unless you practice beforehand. I generally don't. But when you do Ramadan, do be conscious of this. I mean, let's say even if you can't fast the whole day, fast with the consciousness even half a day or 3/4 of the day. It still has an effect on you. And when you experience Ramadan, please read the Quran as well. Again, you don't have to do the bullet train reading where you just recite a whole part just for the sake of it. No. Even if you take 2-3 verses and really chew it over in your mind, I believe that will have a positive effect. So, with that, I close this khutbah and I bid you a blessed Ramadan. Thank you.